Hello, everyone. Tonight I want to talk to you about Hannah. Hannah is a woman of faith, a woman who, in the depths of her despair and brokenness, she prayed and she trusted God, and her prayer was answered in a miraculous way. You find the story of Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and chapter 2. You find the context of Hannah extremely interesting. The story of Hannah comes towards the end of a period in Israel called Judges. So if you go back a little bit and you see the book of Judges, you'll find that the book of Judges is filled with despair, brokenness, is filled with people, the people of God trying to do what they thought was right. And that was always a problem because whenever people are left to do what they think is right, then we end up in big trouble. And that's what happened. The book of Judges ends on a terrible note. We find the story of a Levite whose wife is raped and left for dead by a whole community from the tribe of Benjamin. And this sort of sin hasn't been heard. And that's what happens whenever people are left to their own devices. When people are left to do what they think is right, it ends up in an awful state. And that's what happens at the end of Judges. If you look at chapter 19, 20, and 21, this is how it ends. It ends on a horrendous note. And to me, it's probably the saddest story in the whole of the Bible. The Levite is so disturbed by what happened. He cuts his wife in 12 pieces, sends it to all the tribes, and they are absolutely enraged. They declare war on the Benjaminites, and the book ends on a very terrible note. And that's, in a sense, the context in which Hannah lived. The nation of God, the nation of Israel, the nation that is meant to worship God, is meant to love God, is meant to obey God, are distant and immoral. And so in this context, Hannah lives. And the sad thing is that at that time, Eli was the high priest. Eli was a man that was meant to help people get back to God, but he was completely useless. His sons that were meant to take over him were corrupt and immoral, and they were stealing food from the temple. They were committing adultery with the women that were coming to the temple, seducing them and forcing them to do all sorts of awful things. So you can imagine it's not a nice time to be alive. And the story of Hannah begins with Elkanah. Elkanah is her husband, but because of that time, people do their own thing, and we find that Elkanah has two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. Peninnah seems to be happy, and mostly because she has children. And although Elkanah loves Hannah, she is mistreated because of that fact. She cannot have children. So the story of Hannah is a story of sadness, and as you read in the first chapter, you find that she's mistreated, she is discriminated against, and the fact is that in those days, when a woman could not have children, everybody around thought that she was either cursed by God or she was punished by God. And so we find her pretty broken. So the first thing I want you to see when it comes to Hannah's story is her brokenness. And not only that she's broken about her inability to have children, but Peninnah seems to taunt her with every opportunity. Every year, people were required to go to the temple, and every year, whenever they were going to the temple, Hannah left more broken and more disappointed. And I believe it's all to do with the fact that she felt that God is not answering her prayers. I always felt that unanswered prayer is one of the reasons why a lot of people abandon their faith. Whenever they pray and nothing happens, and automatically they believe that there is no God, or somehow God has abandoned them. And you can imagine every year Hannah going to the temple, praying and asking God to give her a baby, and it doesn't happen. Not only that, but Peninnah taunts her, mocks her. And you most likely, I'm just thinking here, most likely uses her prayers to taunt her. Not only that Peninnah taunts her, but Elkanah has a weird sense of humor. Because whenever she comes home and she's sad and she's crying, he comes up with this statement. I mean, only a man could say these kind of things, but here's what he says. "Why are you crying, Hannah?" Elkanah would ask. "Why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons? I'm like thinking, dude, what on earth are you doing? This woman is so broken, and you are twisting the knife in her back. So the context of her life is not very nice. Everybody looks upon her as being cursed by God. Everybody looks upon her as being punished by God. And so Hannah is very unhappy. She lives a tragedy. Most likely in her mind, there's nothing worse than to be myself. However, one year everything changes, and we find that this year was different. I believe this year, or that year, whenever she went to the temple, she went with a different attitude of heart. And we are told that Hannah went into the temple to pray, into the tabernacle. The temple hadn't been built by then. And Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow: "O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime. And as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut." She is so desperate to know God's blessing that she makes this vow. And the interesting thing is that as she prays in deep anguish and crying bitterly, she prays to herself. There's nothing coming out. And Eli sees her there moving her lips, but no words come out. And he thinks that she's drunk, and she tells her off. But she says, "Oh no, sir, I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger, but I'm very discouraged. And I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I am a wicked woman, for I've been praying out of great anguish and sorrow." So everything about Hannah so far, it's about this deep anguish, about this deep distress. She is broken. But her prayer seems to change everything. In that case, Eli said, "Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request you have asked of him." And what amazes me about this is that the moment Eli confirms her prayer, she says, "Oh, thank you, sir," she explained. Then she went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad. I love that. I love that. This, I believe this prayer changed Hannah's life. In her brokenness, she prays, but this time absolutely willing to put her desire into God's hands. In other words, God, if you give me this, son, I'm going to give it back to you. Sometimes we pray for things because we want them. And I think this is the shift in Hannah's thinking. She wanted a son to make her feel better, to make people appreciate her. But when Hannah changes her prayer and she prays and says, God, I want a son that you may be glorified, that you may be exalted, that he may serve you. It's not about me, but it's about you. Then her faith gives her peace. You see, in her brokenness, she prayed, but in her faith, she had peace. And we are told that she went home, she started to eat. Usually around this time, she would not eat. She would be very sad, broken, but this time was different. She prayed with faith, knowing that now she wants a son in order to glorify God. She doesn't want a son for herself, to make herself feel better. And she was no longer sad. And so it happens that immediately she gets pregnant and she gives birth to a son, and she calls him Samuel. That means asked of God, or heard of God. And as she promised, once the baby is weaned, she brings Samuel to the tabernacle and brings him back to God. Now, the amazing thing is, in 1 Samuel 2:21, we read that after she did that, Hannah goes on to have 3 sons and 2 daughters after Samuel. So something changed in Hannah's life when she changed her priorities in prayer. If beforehand she wanted a son for herself, now she wants a son for God. And when we do that, then God rewards us. And so she ends up with 5 children after Samuel. Isn't it amazing? In chapter 2, you can go and read Hannah's song. And one thing that you will notice is that Hannah's song is the mirror image of the song that Mary sings after Jesus is born. And it's amazing just to see the parallel of these 2 women that are centuries apart. Mary sings one song, and it's the mirror of the song that Hannah sings. So what am I learning from her story? Well, I learned that in brokenness, Hannah prayed. And I think this is important for us to learn, that whenever things happen, whenever we are broken, prayer is something that can lift our faith. But again, make sure the priorities are in the right place. And God rewards people that pray for the right reason. Hannah prayed in brokenness, but Hannah had peace in her faith. Samuel goes on to not just be a son to Hannah, but be a prophet in Israel. It's Samuel that is very instrumental in giving us King David. And so the blessing that Hannah received is not just a blessing for herself, but is a blessing for the whole nation. And this is what I've also learned. Whenever I pray that God may be glorified, the blessing that he gives me becomes the blessing of others. And that is an amazing thing to experience. So I pray that your discussion after this will be filled with wisdom, and the lessons that we learn from Hannah are absolutely amazing. So have fun by discussing her life. God bless you.